Assalamu alaikum. This is EduTour Live Chat 37. Welcome back, familiar family and friends. Thank you for joining us once again. Today I'd like to start our chat with an acknowledgement of land, which would be an acknowledgement of the great River Sindhu, the River Indus, and her 3,200 kilometers of incredibly fertile land on either side of her embankments that has not only sustained life for 5,000 plus years, but also years before that. It has been the reason why millions of people have come to visit. Some have stayed, some have taken and left. But these are the incredibly colorful cultural diversities that we celebrate in the EduTours, in our exploration for identity, for rediscovery of our lost shared histories in the bioregion. And we believe that in this journey we are all together. So everybody who is here, who is a family of the Cube EduTours, many of you who've been on tours with me, some more recently, some who've been part of this journey for the last 8 years when I started in July 2012. So just as a quick recap, a lot of what we do is to understand context. And for those who are joining us recently, to understand the context of this framework, I might suggest that you go through our Instagram page, please, and look at the pictures, look at the places we've been to, look at how we see architectural history, how we look at ancient maps, what is the kind of information we extrapolate from them, how are we beginning to join the dots of a very fundamental question of who we are as Pakistanis and as people in the region who have influenced all of us, and how we have influenced them back. Who we are, where we've come from, and how relevant all of that material, that contact of rediscovery, of reconfiguring, of redefining is going to play a role in who we are in a post-pandemic future. So in that vein, I'm going to introduce two things today. One is this is a great book of paintings. I show these books on, it's almost a book per chat. And if you're interested in any of these books in detail, because it all shows up backwards and it's hard to read in the chat, feel free to drop me a message in the DM or in a comment, and I'll tell you what the book is and where it can be found. This one is Legends of the Indus. It's all about a series of phenomenal paintings that I've done here that talk about the history of the beautiful, beautiful River Indus and what all she has given us for thousands of years. So that is the book for today to be introduced to you. I am going to now see if Jose is coming on board. I hope, as he's saying, he's having a problem with his internet connection. He should still try and sign on. Jose DeJesus-Zamora is our guest for today from to bring him to you. Jose has been sent an invitation. Here he is. Hi.
Hi. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Perfectly fine connection. Imi?
I am sorry. I am having such a lot.
Yes, it is a bad connection. Is there something you can do about it, or we just have to play along with the connection? Managers.
The best I can think is try to move into another place. Maybe I should work with the data versus the Wi-Fi. Should I try and reconnect? I am sorry about this.
Yes, please reconnect.
Did you get me? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Okay,
reconnect. So while we wait for Jose to reconnect, there are people who are joining us in the last few weeks, more recently, and good to see new faces. To give you a little background, the whole project here is being curated in a very special manner. We are all contributors, we're all participants, but there is a framework. And the framework is basically such that each one of these chats provides us all with something to talk about, which is all directly connected somehow in some way to our explorations of the architectural heritage site that I go to and take you to, and we study with drawings, we take our maps there, on location, pop-up classrooms. It all focuses and boils back down to that same fundamental core value of this project. So each one of these live chats is a beautiful standalone artistry, but also please keep in mind it's not out of context. They all somehow connect back to where it is we began, and everybody who's participating in it is helping me weave this embroidery of conversations that we can build on in the future towards an educational curriculum generated by all of us together right here. Jose, I can see you clearer. Can you hear me better? This is much better.
Yes.
I can actually see you also, which is really quite lovely.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for your patience with my technology.
That's all right. I've discussed it with Jean before. I live in Pakistan. The one thing that they do teach us here is patience. We all develop a very high level of patience living in Pakistan, especially in a city like Karachi, which is very, very difficult. It's a very difficult urban, apocalyptic megalopolis that we live in, but it's home. And so that's where I'm going to start off with our conversation with you, is I have all this information on you about the incredible thought-provoking work you're doing, the critical thinking you're doing for the students at Parsons. But I'm going to just put that aside, Jose, for a minute and say, where were you born? I know you live in New York, but where were you born? And let's start from there.
I was born in Puerto Rico, and I grew up and I was raised there, and I lived there until I finished college in 1986, and then I came to New York City. Actually, I came to the States in 87, and I spent 1 year in Massachusetts and the rest of my life in New York. So I have lived more than half of my life in New York City, but my formative years were all spent in Puerto Rico. So we're very multicultural. That's one thing that I have to say, in the sense of we have a lot of genetically, especially, we are multiracial, multicultural. Our culture is a little bit more cohesive, but just I wanted to mention that in terms of what we might be talking in a little bit. So,
Puerto Rico, yeah. Quiet, because your multicultural history is of great interest to me. There's a Latin base. There's also because there's a Spanish influence also. But what can you tell us about Puerto Rican history before the colonization, and what do you call home? For you, is Puerto Rico home? Is New York home? Where's home?
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. We Puerto Ricans that live outside, we call ourselves the Puerto Ricans in the diaspora,
right?
Which that we are kind of like this community that's like an extension of Puerto Rico into larger global kind of like context. But it's funny because there is a tension between us and them in a way, because like they don't recognize us, they don't like us to participate in their conversation. So it is a little bit of a displacement. That's how I would talking about where I presently feel like I feel a certain sense of displacement, because I feel like home, Puerto Rico is it's home, but it's a home that I left, and there is something kind of like interesting about that. And I have been looking at my experience from as a Puerto Rican, living there, growing there, and then moving away, and it's very different the way that I feel now from the outside looking in than when I was in there looking out. So I don't know if I went off the subject here.
You're right on target. You're right on target. This is why I'm not interrupting. You're right on target.
I just don't want to get derailed, because I could do that.
Just keep going. So you talk about a displacement. I'm sure Jean has told you. I came back to Pakistan 20 years after being away 20 years. 10 years back. So I was born in Karachi, and I traveled all over the world. I grew up in the UK, I lived in New York, in Mexico, in Dubai, in Tokyo, and I've come back. So I can understand the sense of displacement, which, oddly enough, even though I've been here 10 years now, Jose, there are occasions when I still feel a little bit like a tourist, and I insist on saying I'm home. But there are definitely times when even now, a decade later, there's something that will happen. There'll be a cultural twist that I'm not expecting. So I wonder what that sense of displacement is for you. What causes that, do you think?
Well, I mean, like in social media, for example, that's the most immediate example I can think of. Like conversations about politics and about like ideas about like who we are and identity and even race. So it's a very interesting place that I have come to be after living all these years outside and seeing how people think within, and that's one example. Another example is going back to the island and seeing like my hometown that looks like nothing like it used to look when I grew up there. So all this memory of like place is just being kind of like shaken up. It's like, where is my city? Where is my town? And following up with that, it's a little bit emotionally devastating because you feel like the history becomes only a memory, and there's not much there to go and see or show anyone. So that's a little hard. I mean, as being away and knowing and going and seeing those losses, I feel like they're losses.
It is really hard. I can completely understand. How often do you go home? Do you go back once a year or once 3-4 years? How often?
No. The truth is, I haven't been there for a while. When my mother died, my adoptive mother died, we went back there, threw her ashes into the ocean. I live in a fisherman's village, so the ocean was like very ever present. And then I did not go back, maybe once, but not in over a decade now. So I'm a little ashamed to admit that, but I haven't been. But I think I feel like a little bit of a hard time going and facing those memories. Family not there anymore. The face of the city is changing all the time, and so it's hard. It's hard to go and face that for me. But,
so you're not alone. You're not alone, Jose, because, for instance, there are so many Pakistanis who live abroad and haven't come back to Pakistan. The expat community, and we've had these conversations before where they say the same thing, that I come back to Karachi or I come back to Lahore. It's changed so much, and we just have these, what they often refer to as flimsy memories. But don't you think that there's those? Yes, the buildings have changed. Yes, the cities have changed. People have grown up. Generations have died and passed away, and there's a new lot coming up, and there's a disconnection. But if your roots are from there, don't you think that displacement could be reinvigorated if you were to go back and live there again, and the memories could start becoming more tangible?
I have not given thought to coming back, but that's something to think about. I mean, there's many reasons why my action has, which is another conversation. But I have like a change culturally, my politics, my identity, many things that I find myself a little bit having a hard time reconciliating this with my own roots. So I feel like when I go there, I try to choose to go to places like I was thinking. It's like if I went there, I would go to this city in the south of Puerto Rico, which is Ponce, which has a lot of the identity that I remember. It's like I'm really kind of like nostalgic, I guess, for the past, or at least the past that I grew up with. So I am drawn to the most historically complete places that are there, and I can think of like this city, South Ponte, which is amazing. And that would be a place that I would like to spend some time, because it really brings me back, and it's just very joyful to see so many places that are kept in good condition. I think I just respond to the destructions of so many places that I just, it's hard emotionally to see that.
I think it's really beautiful that you keep coming back to how difficult it is emotionally, and we're just talking about a city that you could go back to or not go back to. You could move from New York to LA to Hong Kong, or you could move back to Puerto Rico, but the emotional strings that it pulls on you means that sense of place in terms of a concept of home is still a raw, open wound, and there's a dialogue that probably needs to happen there. I think that's really beautiful. So to help with that, let's say that there's of the island before anybody arrived there. The people that were there, the food that they ate, the habitation that they lived in, the indigenous architecture. And then there was the colonial influence that was imposed on the island, and that has stayed, and you grew up in some of that. And then there's the version of Puerto Rico that's in your mind that you live with in New York, the contemporary Puerto Rico, when you go back and you think, I don't want to own this, right? This is not any part of this is not structured in my memory. So I think part of that resistance is that it doesn't match your memories from 10, 15 years ago. So those three, would you say that that's a fair analysis of what's happening there? There's a pre-colonial, colonial, and what you want to disown yourself from, which is the contemporary Puerto Rico. In that framework, Jose, has changed. What is the genetics of a Puerto Rican? And I'm not really interested in the Spanish influence, the colonial influence. I'd like you to go back further with me to the island before anybody arrived there. Do you have any idea what the race truly was like in its essence?
Well, the majority of the indigenous people that lived in Puerto Rico were the Taínos, and I believe there was another smaller tribe that were called the Caribes, but they were very peaceful people. They lived a life that was very laid back, and they did not seem to have any major conflicts among them, and they had their religion was completely destroyed, and their language. So most of the elements of culture that we have are just like artifacts that you find in a museum. There is a place in Tualo in the center of the island that is one of the most complete places left. And I believe that probably the one thing that is left, the names of some towns in the island, maybe the foods. I mean, I know that every time that I crave the corn and the yuca, there are certain things that I crave that I always feel this is my indigenous kind of like crave. But I do not know enough of the culture of the indigenous to be able to speak to that. And genetically, I am 11% native. So I believe that is according to the National Geographic statistics of genetics. From all the Puerto Ricans that have tested for genetic makeup, 10% seems to be kind of like a common amongst the larger population. So
that's amazing. And I was actually sort of cusp of a bunch of really fantastic, colorful little countries around it. But if I'm going to bug you about the pre-colonial Puerto Rico, then do you have any idea of their relationship with the Native Americans on the other side of the water and the kind of things they might have been trading? I mean, for instance, if somebody was to close their eyes and imagine Puerto Rico 1,000 years ago, would we imagine Native American type environments, or Aborigine or Eskimo? What is the kind of, or pygmy Southeast Asian, like what one would have found in the rainforests of Indonesia? What kind of people would we imagine would be living there? What would they have worn or eaten? I suppose they were carnivores, essentially, like most people at that time.
Well, like I said, I am aware of all these details, but I do know that they were mostly live on the fish, and the island is very easy to get to the coast from any whatever point you are. So it's a very small.
Yeah.
So 35 miles by 100 miles. So it's tiny. So it was very accessible to the coast, and so the fish was definitely one of the sources. And then the middle of the island has a completely different climate, and by the presence of that large, I believe it's like a baseball, court, like they played something that was similar to the baseball. So they had that kind of like a place in the center of the island, and the climate there is wonderful. I mean, it's very humid and fresh, and there's a lot area. I believe that they were mostly peaceful. I don't believe that they tend to extend. They were not like this kind of like going elsewhere, but they were attacked by other tribes. I believe that the Caribes came, and they were the ones that were warriors, and they, the Puerto Rican Indigenous, as far as I know, were not people that were ready for war. They were not. In them, this warrior kind of like a principle did not seem to be something very common. So I imagine them to be just very peaceful people that lived very close to nature, and that their religions were very very much about like nature, following, observing the behave and trying to predict the weather accordingly, and like move following those currents. There was I believe certain wisdom that came from just their observation of nature, but very vague. I mean, I have learned a little bit from people who claim to be kind of like a higher indigenous genetically, and there is even a reservation down south in Puerto Rico that I did not know until years after I left. So that is something that's interesting, especially now that we're having this conversation.
I was going to say that I think at the end of this conversation, much as though I keep pushing to bring Gene Gardner to Pakistan, I think we should all take you to Puerto Rico first. I think we should go and try and put that jigsaw puzzle back together for all of us, because I'm just wondering if some of the Cajun food had crossed over from Puerto Rico or vice versa, that we see in Louisiana, that whole belt, and the relationship with Cuba. But it's so interesting that when we study these ancient civilizations, whether it's a little island called Puerto Rico, or two little islands we call New Zealand, or an island we call Greenland or Iceland, or the island of Asia, it's funny how they all had a very intimate relationship with the alignment of nature, nature's geometry, nature's structure, how nature relates a single atom to infinity, and how the scales just effortlessly and fluidly go from the universe to the core of the earth in this celestial game. So all ancient civilizations have this, and I know you have a phenomenal interest in geometry. And of course, where I come from, here, the astrologers, the astronomers, it's all about geometry. We talk about the sacred geometry. You joined us very kindly when Sana was doing the demonstration last week on Thursday. So I would love to know. Let's talk about that also a little bit. What's your fascination with geometry from your point of view versus ours, which is all based on the Islamic patterns we see on our facades and our ancient shrines and mosque buildings. What's your take on it? You're potentially coming from a different direction.
Well, geometry has been it started as this. Let me go back in time. In ninth grade.
I love it.
Yeah, in ninth grade, I was like a 14-year-old, kind of like a typical teenager, kind of like lost and distracted. I couldn't find kind of like anything that held my attention. My grades were going to very just a mess, and my parents were very worried. They always worried about us, doing well in school. So they changed me into another school, and I remember very, very vividly that one of the first things that changed me was like this geometry class.
Right.
And I was just like, why? I mean, I remember very, very clearly learning some very basic things like the Pythagorean theorem, and then feeling very comfortable when I would just go through these exercises. And then I was able to understand that when you said the square of one leg and the other made the square of the hypotenuse, I was like, I turned that into images and figures, and I was like, oh my God, this is just so fascinating and so comforting, I think. It was like, I felt like my life was very chaotic, and suddenly I was finding a place where I felt safe and comfortable, and that I could predict, like, this with this is going to give me that. So I started kind of like internalizing this sense of like a cause could have an effect. So everything became clear in an embodied kind of way. So, I mean, like from that, I started kind of like having, I got better, but like I felt like the geometry kind of like together, kind of like I was able to center myself, and I was able to gather myself in a way that was new. So, I mean, that was... But I think that when I started teaching this course at Parsons, the Space and Materiality, and having to develop exercises and dealing with multicultural groups of students, I came to this place where I started remembering some of these exercises and how comforting they were. And then I also remembered some construction drawings that I learned to do for figuring sizes or spacing things and equally, and the constructions that I learned to do. And then I started finding that if you continue the circles, and instead of drawing what you were trying to, the constructions in themselves were amazing. And so that took me to another place completely, and I started getting engaged, and I felt the engagement in these experiences. And I started bringing that to my class, my students. And one of the things that would strike me was that when I would engage students in these very immersive exercises, there was a silence in my studio with the students that you would not even believe. You're like 18-year-old, freshmen, they're like, but they would get into these exercises and they would not care about time, they would not care about their cell phones, they would just be in the moment, present, completely immersed. And I started noticing how this changed them. It was a very subtle shift that you started feeling from the students. They made more eye contact, they were like evolving more as adults. There were like tiny little things that I would feel that was happening with them. And I felt like this is a geometry that centers them. Plus, it was something that was no vocabulary. I could explain it, showing how do you do it with my hands. And then I would have Asian students that hardly spoke any English. I would have students from, Florida. I would have a student from, India, somewhere. Like, all these people came together, and it was like a universal language that we all could speak. And I remember one student expressed to me, this is like something that I love that I never even knew I would love. So I started doing that. So I became very interested in the possibilities of geometry, not just for the thing that you can do, physically with it, but what it does to you. So, in a nutshell, yes.
So what is it about the geometry that was creating the silence? Because it sounds like it has a huge. I mean, I've experienced this, but I want to hear it from you and the way you express it. That the quality of transcendence and the ability that it allows you to get somewhere else through these movements, and how those movements, which are very simple, as you know, Jose, the geometric movements that you make your students do, or that a lot of them are very fundamentally basic, and you wouldn't imagine that such simple movements of creating circles and squares and then getting them to play with each other in little gestures, like you said, a small little movement can create such a huge impact on us, where it takes the noise out of our lives. It brings in a very architectural silence. It's a silence you can almost touch, and you can hear it because it's so loud. Different cultural backgrounds, they all fall into that invisible language, which is, tremendous, absolutely tremendous. What do you think happened? You're watching these kids, you're feeling the energy, so when you're there, what do you think is happening inside them?
I think that geometry is like a place where we are all capable of entering, and it's kind of like universal. There's a certain universality about this very abstract practice, which transcends cultural or geographic barriers, and it seems like everyone, in my experience, everyone is capable of going there. So it's one of those things that you cannot go much farther than that when you're trying to unify. So I don't know. There is I always remember the idea of the Heist System, and how all these bees are there working, concentrating on what they're doing, and then this beautiful, magnificent, perfect geometric system emerges. So I feel like we're all like bees together when we're in this process, and we're like carving these places that are unique and personal, but at the same time cohesive with what's next to you. And it's kind of an exercise in being individual, but at the same time connected.
Collective, yeah. Individual, but part collective. So, did any of the students tell you how they were feeling? What was happening to them emotionally?
I did get some of these responses. I'm trying to remember. Like, I remember this one comment of the student that she told me that this was something that she loved doing, but she never even knew that she would. So it was like a discovery. Also, I heard a lot of them saying that they felt like they were remembering this, even though they never did it, and that's a thing that keeps coming to me, like a memory, and I believe this might be ancestral memory. I believe this, that perhaps there is an ancestor or somebody that learned or that practiced these things, and they come back to you, they manifest, you recognize them. And I believe that geometry has that, because I feel that if your ancestor lived in a certain place and you sometimes will travel to that place even without having ever been there, I have experienced, and I have seen this in others, that they feel that memory, they feel that connection with the place, that they feel like I've been here before, And I feel that I've seen it happen with my students a lot, that they feel that connection and they get more interested in connecting. I have brought a cultural, kind of like a imagery into these practices. Like, I have students do tessellations using very basic systems, and then try to bring them into their own culture and say, find within your culture some kind of like designs that actually seem to be, connected with these others. And so it creates a very interesting movement of people starting to connect things. And what happens is that when you start kind of like seeing that what you are doing connects with something else that's out there, that something else takes a new importance. It's different from you for you to have to look at it in a book, or you know that this was done in a year, or by this one or that one person, than you making it and it emerging from you.
Yes.
And then, and then you see that this is here or there. So I've had a lot of that experience with students. And then also them finding these shapes and these movements out in their own experience. Oh, I've been seeing this shape now everywhere. Now that I'm working in class, or like I noticed this, the way that the plants are branching out, that have to do with these numbers and stuff like that. So they become more observant. Their sense of time changes. They can sit down and look around and smell the flowers a little bit more than they did before they went through these experiences.
It's fantastic and so true. So, this ancestral wisdom, at the end, the search for the ancestral wisdom is really one of the main features of we are in the process of digging around and exploring and trying to discover. So I take people to these ancient heritage. Jose, I would love for you to come out, because some of what you're saying I see happening to these people, where they feel like they've been here before, or there's a relationship to the place. And most people that go with me don't know how to draw, they're not architects, so they're not visually inclined. And then exactly what you just said happens is they start seeing things, because we do a series of drawings on those locations. They're not structured geometric drawings, but they are drawings that make you or help you see. And they will end up seeing things that they would not normally have seen while they're too busy taking pictures from their phones. So it's amazing what that does to them. And I wonder if helping people to see, I mean, you were very kind, diplomatically you said it helps them see better. I just say it helps them see, because otherwise, from what I see, is there are millions of people just going through life like a bull in a china shop, busy, buying, busy buying, sleep, get up, and it's just insane noise. Forced holidays, and they force a trip here. It's all very produced, and it's not natural, it's not organic, it's not sensual, it's not spiritual. It's just kind of like it's all structured on a schedule, and they make plans months ahead. And if they don't feel like doing it when the time comes, they still do it because it was planned in January. So I think that I would love to try and figure out with you, what is it that causes this phenomena to happen, which you've experienced with your students in New York, and I've experienced with my visitors and travelers with me in different cities and different sites in Karachi, in Pakistan, from 1,000-year-old Jain temples to Tafbahi, from to Mohenjo-daro, which is 5,000-year-old. What is it what happens in there? What causes this awareness and this transcendence and the ability to see in the silence? What do you think is happening to the brain?
Well, what I feel is that one of the problems one of the obstacles that I have faced as a teacher. I mean, I've been teaching over 20 years, and I have seen a couple of generations of students, and I have to say that the challenges of this younger generation is that they have so much attention placed in their devices that you are competing with that attention. So it's very hard to create activities and exercises that have that strength to compete with something like that. Geometry has been very successful, so that I give it my vote in that sense. So it allows people to exercise how to step out of that and how to come into this place of being present and forget about all these distractions. So one of the things is like learning how to be present and learning how to pay attention to what's around you, like it was the very first time that you see it. So coming out and looking with a fresh eye and always finding something new in what's in front of you is something that my dog can do very easily. my dog sits down and she is looking, and I'm like, oh my God, I have learned a lot from my dog, because I'm like, you know, this is very important, and we need to cultivate. To me, whether I'm teaching a class like this in geometry, or whether I'm teaching a drawing class from a model, or teaching in the streets to draw perspective. So it is only if you can immerse yourself in a state of like meaningful connection with whatever it is that you're doing, that you will find. Otherwise, you don't find anything. The snapshot is just, a snapshot. It doesn't have that depth. So I believe that if anything, the practice of geometry will take you into learning how to immerse, how to enter that space of immersion. And then, it's not like you have to, I would insist on having people continue doing that, but once you learn how to enter there, there's something that opens, and and you have access to it easier, whatever other thing that you do. I know that people connect by doing yoga and by doing other practices, meditation. So I think I put the practice of geometry right there with those. We enter those spaces, and that's how I've successfully been able to bring my students along. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
It makes all the sense. It makes all the sense. But that leads us into the geometry of the body. When you talk about yoga, which is a lot of it is about balance, and not only the balance of the human body with the earth and gravity and that force, but also the balance of mind and soul, and to be able to shut the noise out. It's about control, about creating nothingness, creating that void for something else to come in. So when do the students, that when you teach them the abstract forms, do they also ask you questions? Do they understand the relationship with Vitruvian man and the human body, our geometry? Do they get into that depth?
Absolutely. I have done a lot of work with this. So a curriculum that I have developed, which is we start with a very simple construction. Actually, this is I don't know if you can see it well. It's pretty much the circles template that you can generate 60-degree triangles or hexagons, and pretty much you can actually construct the beehive from here. These are arts that I have made using this kind of abstractions. But pretty much we go through this. We go through the construction of the Platonic solids within this matrix, and the ratios that exist between one and the other, like 1 to 2, root of 2, 1.618, or the number phi, they actually produce these really beautiful objects. And if you file that mathematic, you actually come with this nest. By movement, which I call movement using the compass only. So I love to bring that practice because it generates those ratios by just the choreography of the compass. Then those same principles and those same ratios, I find I show students how to find them in the body. Sometimes I have them measure their own bodies and start seeing how you find the half of the figure and in the same place, mostly on different people, how the arm to the hand relates in the golden ratio kind of things. So they start identifying these things from their own bodies. We then study the Leonardo da Vinci Vitruvian man, and we see how those ratios have been considered there and how they relate to what we have done previously. So those constructions figure, and I have become very, very involved with that because it interests me a lot. And at the point that I am now, I would say, is that I have been able to successfully construct a figure using Leonardo's translation of Vitruvius, but I realized that the numbers are very simple, are very like whole numbers. I believe that there might be, there might have been a need for rounding up numbers to make them easier to communicate and transform. But then when I juxtapose the golden section to the pattern that you get from Leonardo, you get something very close but not exact. And then that started to become interesting to me, and I'm like, okay. So I mean, today a whole number system that Vitruvius is proposing is something a much more masculine kind of like way of like making things solid and making things rational and making things simple and like finite. But I'm like, I wonder if this golden ratio number that is never like complete is 1.618 point dot dot dot. So it's a much more open-ended system that allows for movement and changes and transformation. And I'm like, this is the feminine. So I'm like really exploring all those things as we speak, because I've been really thinking about this recently. But I mean, I take my students through that process of the arriving at the figure of the body by connecting it with this other geometric practice previously. So it's a very interesting of events.
It must be fascinating, Jose, because over centuries we have developed a very peculiar relationship with our bodies, and I find that there's a sense of disconnection that we've been trained that is acceptable, that your body you should not discuss, you shouldn't be aware of its sensitivities, you shouldn't be responding to its sensualities, and the skin should just feel like a piece of furniture on top of your organs. It's not really a living creature. There's a sense of pain that religion has imposed, and then culture has taken it on. So the body has really lost its validity and its importance. So I just wonder how these students go from what you have behind you, which is tessellation of circles and triangles, to the arches you made, which I have seen holding up domes, what we call squinching, on the inside of domes in different the squinching to them, taking it back to the golden section. But the fact that our bodies' geometries are coming from nature's geometries, trees, plants, flowers, the earth, the dirt, and also then getting projected to create these forms we call architecture. So I wonder if your students accept that and own it, that our bodies are, and our skin is part of the same alignment, part of the same geometry, and one is just a scale extension of the other. Do they understand that and then celebrate it somehow?
We cannot get into the depth of this, even though I totally agree and embrace conceptually what we're talking about. But my students are first year, so
right.
I only have them for one semester.
Right.
I do try to touch into this as much as possible, and I take it one student at a time. In the context of my class, there are abstract level of like figure making and joy of making these shapes, and that's okay. It's okay for them if they just get there. But there are those students that they just go. They dive, they go into philosophy, they go into history, they go into their culture, they go into religion. And that's where you get all the joy, because then you start kind of like making these connections. And it's coming from them, basically. They're asking the questions, they're bringing the examples, they're, asking how does I found this, what do you think, So that conversation becomes very organically and natural. But at the level at which I am, I don't make that a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, because it's just a lot of aspiration for the kind of like time that we have. But I do support it, and I do believe that it is Um, um, I mean, I know that they, like I said, some of them are just ready at that point, and some of them are. So I take it a case at a time.
How do you think that our, like, you know, Gene and I talk about this, and how do we take all of this kind of lost forms of learning, teaching, sharing, methodologies where, you know, what you're doing is very, very essential. It goes right back to the roots of the fundamentals of drawings, the compass, the pencil, the ruler. You're drawing a circle or you're drawing a square. It's so basic. And it's amazing that now in a point where everything is going digital and online, and post-pandemic, the distance between us is going to be increasing as time and space collapses, and yet you and I are in the same screen within barely an inch of each other. So there's this dichotomy that's going to explode where we're in the same little room, tiny little room that's 2 inches by 4 inches right in front of me, and yet we're 9 hours apart and thousands of miles away from each other. You know, so there's both of these things happening. Like you said, you talk about the male-female issues. I think this is going to play a role even here, that we can even talk about collapsing time and space and the digital future in a masculine-feminine, depending on what level of intimacy one is experiencing. So how do we take something that's essential and move it into the future for a generation that you said distracted, unfocused? What does one do in the post-pandemic new world order?
That's a big question.
Big question for some time.
You know, I mean, I have been having a little bit of, you know, young people in my family. I've been, oh my God, connecting with them. And, I have a nephew that he's very ambitious. He wants to save the world. He wants to do, you know, so much. He's very young. And one of the advices that I have given him is like, you need to downsize now. It's like, this is maybe not the time to look at the large picture. Maybe we need to stop the bird's eye view and need to come down to the present and the space that we are occupying,
right,
the people that we have around us, the community, and work from that point on. Because it's otherwise we're gonna go crazy.
Right.
I mean, and the little gestures of kind can create a better, it's kind of like a force, like an energy, like an energy field that might actually improve the way things are, and that we might actually find our places easier. But like, I think that right now, it depends also individually. I mean, some people have that spirit that they need to be out there and they need to just, you know, to find their own call. And I just feel that there is always something inside of us that might guide us, and we just need to listen and attune with it. And I do know that the practices of meditation and, in my case, geometry, they help you find that place and find that answer. And like I said, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all for all, but I think that if we start by kind of like just working in a smaller context, that might be a good place to start.
It's really interesting that, you know, like you said, instead of trying to take on the hashtag save the world and look at the bigger picture, bird's eye view, it might be a great time to hunker down and look at the now, look at what you can do as an individual with your immediate community. But as I'm also thinking that in terms of the context of fitting these ideas into a curriculum that connects to my work in terms of questioning and discovering and exploring identity, what you're talking about is using ancient wisdom that's tucked inside the geometric forms between the body and the abstract nature. Also in there is a lost history of our voice, the individual voice, and the collective voice. So as you're saying, there's a self-discovery that these exercises help them get to, like the transcendence and the meditation. So if each person can find their own voice in terms of who they really are, not politically, not skin, not color, not height, not sexual orientation, gender, nothing, who they really are, that's really super fundamental. And if the work that you're doing can help them get there, reducing the noise of the digital age and of the devices and all the distractions, that would be a huge service done to humanity if each individual could explore and discover what their own original, unique, signature voice is. I mean, that would be amazing, I think.
I agree. And I believe, once again, I want to reiterate, I don't think that this is a one-size-fits-all.
Right.
Some people might just, they can't deal, this doesn't move them, it's not in them. But I have seen that many people, many students respond in this kind of way. I think it's a common thing. I think in a very essential way, we are geometry, we are points, we're number, we're things, that come back and become a body, and then we go out there and we're all again. Right? So it's just very familiar. I think that thing of familiarity becomes very, makes it easier to connect.
Yeah, that it's this elasticity, the elasticity of familiarity, that one can choose to ignore or come back and re-engage, or what you've talked about is there's a trigger that creates a curiosity, that creates a desire, and I think we're kind of circling around similar issues, bringing us back to the same place using different channels, different languages. We use whether it's trade routes or the indigenous people's languages or their foods or what they believed in the stars and the earth. It's all kind of the same. I talk about the same things here. When we compare sometimes apples and oranges, sometimes not, when we look at Egypt and Indonesia. Yesterday, Jose, I read an article that the Aborigines of Australia were making bread 20,000 years before anybody else, before Mesopotamia, before Egypt. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. So I think that, we've hit many of the things that I would love to continue talking with you some more, and we can build on, because I think we're coming at similar things from different directions, which is the beauty of the whole thing. Exactly as you said, one size doesn't fit all, so one solution isn't the same, one channel of thought process isn't the same, as long as conceptually we understand the relationship between our hearts, our minds, intuition, and what we can give back to the community in small pieces. So I'm going to take my leave, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you for understanding what you're doing. Thank you for sharing your work, your ideas. That's absolutely phenomenal. I look forward to doing more work with you, Jose, if you bear with me and be patient, answer my crazy questions more than once. So it would be amazing. Welcome to the tribe of the Edge family.
Thank you.
And
a pleasure.
The pleasure is absolutely all mine. Thank you once again. Thank you, Jean, for introducing us. And we will speak to you soon, Jose. Have a great rest of the day. Enjoy your summer. And it's nighttime for me, so it's time for dinner and bed. Thank you so much. Take care. Love. Be safe from Karachi. Bless you. Bye.